Okay, thank you everyone for joining our webinar today. How to select the right colocation provider, discerning between simple data centers and hybrid IT enablers. So some of the things we're going to cover today are colocation provider classifications, features and benefits, the future of hybrid IT and how your colocation provider fits in, the importance of interconnection and its varying flavors, transparency from your data center partner, and more. My name is Gerard Heiner. I'm the Chief Business Officer here at Webair. I've been with the organization for about 16 years. I am joined today by my colleague and Webair CTO, Siggy Brody. And we're also excited to have the Executive Director of OpenIX, Barry Woodcup, here with us today. So just a quick overview about Webair. Webair has been around for a little over 20 years now. We're headquartered in New York. We deliver secure, agile, and reliable managed cloud and infrastructure solutions, focusing on private cloud, virtual private cloud, disaster recovery as a service, backup as a service, and co-location. We have a global footprint with data center locations around the world, and we are speaking to you today from our headquarters and flagship data center in New York. With that, I'm going to hand over the reins to our CTO, Siggy Brody.
Thanks, Gerard. So I just want to also thank Valerie for joining us on the webinar. If you're not familiar with OpenIX, I'll give a brief overview. I'm sure Valerie will do a much better job later on. But OpenIX is a non-for-profit organization whose purpose is to develop uniform standards for internet peering exchanges, network fabrics, as well as the data centers. Webair is a participant of through volunteers of OpenIX and is also certified as a data center with OpenIX. So going right into the agenda that Gerard laid out, what we're trying to do on this webinar is to really help people understand that not all co-location data centers are created equal, and not all co-location vendors are created equal. And we want to help people who are maybe in the market for co-location understand what they should be looking for based on what their use cases, workloads, and requirements are, so that they can make the best decisions. And we'll also talk about how OpenIX can help in that process. So the first order of business is really to identify the different types of facilities that we'll be reviewing, and those are listed here. You have the wholesale type of facilities, which are typically reserved for use cases that are in the multi-megawatts. So we're not even talking about, we're not even looking at it from a cabinet perspective. It's more about the total power utilization and density. Those types of facilities are typically reserved for hyperscalers, so the likes of Amazon, Facebook, Google, who are buying buildings at a time from a co-location vendor, pods at a time, and they're really at a very large scale. That's not really going to be the focus today. Those folks don't need my help. they have thousands of people who can figure out what they need there. So the others are going to be co-location facilities which are focused on interconnection. These are ones that are space and power wrapped around a very healthy and vibrant meet me room ecosystem, such as 60 Hudson or 111 8th in Manhattan, 1 Wilshire in Los Angeles, 350 Cermak in Chicago, and so on and so on. Those are going to be co-location facilities that are very dense from a network connectivity perspective. So if you're looking to connect to 5, 10, 15 or more networks, you want to be looking at those. Then we have sort of what's more prevalent with the end user base is retail co-location. Co-location that is suited for enterprise organizations, ones that are looking to consume anywhere from 1 to 20 cabinets. And then we'll also look at what we like to call retail plus, or co-location that is suited for enterprise organizations, plus acts as a hybrid IT enabler, or has an ecosystem of services within the footprint which can enable hybrid IT. We'll talk a lot about that. And then the last type of sort of co-location vendor is a niche player. They exist to service a niche. Maybe it's a geographical niche, close to a certain market, close to a metro, maybe close to a public cloud, or maybe the niche is around very high dense power consumption for high performance compute, or crypto or others. So the factors that we'll be looking at and sort of comparing these different types of colocation vendors, we'll be looking at these factors here, which are what do you need to consider and what are the right questions you should be asking around space, power and cooling, network connectivity, the geography and how it affects latency, remote assistance, so remote hands and all the other sort of types of assistance that the vendor can provide, and then cloud services and hybrid IT enablement, and lastly, cost.
So would it be fair to say, Siggy, that these are all the factors that one really needs to look at prior to engaging with the potential vendors, like basically what you would see into an RFP?
Yes. Hopefully this will help you think about how to write your RFPs or what the right questions you should be asking, and it doesn't become something that only appears months after you've selected a vendor. So the first one is really space, physical space. Again, we're not going to go into of the wholesale market because those are typically built to spec. Because they're on such a large scale, the end user can be very demanding from how they want their pods designed and how the distribution and cooling should be set up. So we're really going to focus on retail and all the others that I mentioned, the interconnection, the retail plus. So a few quick points to consider if you're talking to colocation vendors. If you're in the market, here are some of the gotchas that I've seen. Webair, even though we also sell colocation space globally, because we started as a managed cloud service provider and still are, we've been on the other end of this colo conversations for years. So we've sort of learned the good, the bad, the ugly, and sometimes the hard way. So our intention here is to help you in your quest and hopefully you don't have to make the same mistakes. So some of the points to consider are be sure, try to get right of first refusal for adjacent cabinets. If you're looking for 3 cabinets from a vendor, it doesn't hurt to ask for right of first refusal on the other cabinets that are adjacent that are empty. Most vendors will give you this and at no cost, but you don't get it unless you don't ask for it. So ask for it and make it a contingency. You usually will get it. The other is have your lawyer look through the contract to see if there's anything about forced migrations. Some colocation vendors will do this sneaky thing of putting in a clause that says that they can move you to a different part of their data center, a different building on the campus, or a completely different facility as they see fit, and you really can't have anything to say about that. So that's something that you might find in there. Be sure you're okay with that, or obviously remove it if not. The next is if you are consuming a few cabinets which are adjacent to each other, don't assume that the vendor is going to allow you to run cables between them. They may or may not. They may force you to go above their ladder racking, which is fine. They may force you to go back to their meet me room, which can be extremely costly, either on a one-time basis or a monthly basis. So ask the question of, can I run my own cables? Can they be above the cabinets? Do I have to go to the ladder rack? Does that mean that you have to run them for me? Understand that in advance, because that could be a very costly misstep. Also, be sure that there's nothing in the contract, or even ask them if they're going to force you to rearrange your cabinet based on what they perceive to be energy efficiencies. Good example of this is if you have a rack full of servers with a top of rack switch, and that top of rack switch, which is probably not using any more than 100 watts, is blowing hot air out the front. In a perfect world, yes, it wouldn't be doing that, but they shouldn't be focusing on your tiny switch if all your servers are arranged properly. So be sure that they're not forcing you to do things which you know are really not causing an issue. Same thing for cables. Some vendors can actually go in and tell you to recable the entire back of your cabinet because they believe it's allowing heat to stagnate there. You don't want to be in those situations, so make sure it's clear up front. Understand not all racks are created equal. If you get quotes for co-location from 5 vendors, ask them what the dimensions of their cabinet are. If you have a vendor who's willing to give you a rack with a 48-inch depth and a wider footprint, you're actually getting more for your money. You can fit more PDUs in there. You're going to future-proof your footprint by being able to handle denser equipment in future years. So it's not always apples to apples. Size matters.
So Siggy, it's fair to say that when checking a colocation provider, cost is not the primary factor. Yes, it's a factor. I mean, it always comes down to cost to a degree, right? But there's a lot of items here that you should really be vetting prior?
Yeah, I mean, people, sort of gravitate towards cost first, but there might be good reasons why you might want to pay a little bit more. If I'm going into a cabinet with deeper depth, where I can use 0 UPDUs and cable management, where I don't have to do those horizontally, I'm saving space, and maybe a cabinet with a vendor who can provide me more power density, I'm getting a lot more for my money. I might not need it day one, but in the future, as equipment gets denser, there's tons more efficiency. I might be able to get 1.5 or 2 times the amount of computer storage out of a cabinet for the same price. The last points here are just ensure that the vendor is willing to expand within the facility or within the market. If you don't ask, you don't know. You might be in their last sort of footprint in the building or the last building, and after that, they have no appetite to continue expansion. And if you're mindful of compliance, I know at Webair, a lot of our compliance customers, hospitals and banks, and likewise, ask us to put card access readers on each cabinet for accounting and auditing purposes of their employees, their third-party vendors, and even our employees. So those are all potential options to consider.
That's a great point about the card readers and access to the racks. I mean, that's something we're seeing a lot more of today.
Yeah, and again, it's not something people don't necessarily advertise those because they might only have a certain area of the data center where they allow it. But if compliance is important, better to get it done up front. The next, obviously, with colocation, power and cooling, certainly very important. The first point is I would ask, especially if I'm sort of not doing a site tour as my first order of business, if I'm remote, is how is the power being distributed to cabinets? What you'll notice is in older facilities, even though there was a raised floor for purposes of cooling, that raised floor would also be used for branch circuit distribution, power distribution. So if you're in a data center that is distributing the power under the floor, I would certainly ask them to lift up some floor tiles and I take a look and see what's going on under there. If you're seeing tons of conduit and cables and whatever, that's all volume that when the facility was originally designed was reserved for actual cold air. And if it's being consumed by conduit and cables, the facility is not going to be able to achieve the density that it was designed for. The better way to do it is over the rack busway distribution, long power buses where power modules or circuits can be snapped into wherever. The great thing about that is that obviously it's not affecting on the floor, and the vendor can deploy power circuits of any type of configuration, like 20 amp, 120 volt, 30 amp, 208, 3-phase, and so on, by just snapping in a box, never having to call an electrician, never having to be disruptive to your existing ecosystem, and it's obviously very modular. So I definitely be looking for that. Understand what the density is. If maybe you only need a cabinet with 6 kW, you want to know what they can go to in the future, so that you can future-proof your business. And when it comes to A and B redundancy, or N+1 or 2N for power and cooling, the devil's in the detail. On the client side, I've taken so many tours, maybe 20 plus years ago. Yeah, everything's redundant, everything's N+1. A year later, there's one surprise well. All the crack units run one set of pipes throughout the facility, one set of pumps, and the pump failed. So, all your ACs start pushing out hot air at the same time. There's a lot of gotchas. If they say they're tier 3, are they actually certified by the Uptime Institute, or are they just saying that they've been built to tier 3? If they're just saying they've been built, you want to really dig in there and take a look. And that's where OpenIX can really help as well, since OpenIX is another standard, which is much less expensive than the Uptimes, but it will give you assurances as to what does the power and cooling redundancy actually look like. The OpenIX certification includes specific questions so that you as a potential end user can understand where there's exposure, where there's risk, so that you don't have to just take someone's word when they say, yeah, we're built to tier 3.
It's actually good that you mentioned that about raised flooring, because they're obviously all not created equal. I mean, you can have 10-inch raised flooring, 18-inch raised flooring, and it's something that's, I would say, is probably easily overlooked by most people looking at a data center. And the more you have underneath the flooring, you're impeding the airflow.
Yeah, for sure. And so it comes back to density. If they're telling you the facility is is built to handle 10 kW per cabinet. Is it all the racks in the facility? Is it a certain section? If it's a certain area, are you able to increase at some point, or by the time you're ready to do so, has someone else already stolen that potential density in another area? And because the raised flooring was so busy, maybe they can't do that. So the next component is the network, and so a few quick points here. One is that I think the term carrier neutral is sort of widely known and understood within the industry, but I want to kind of take a different perspective on that. Everybody will say they're carrier neutral today, hands down for sure. That's an optics problem. So we're all carrier neutral, great. However, if you're looking at a colocation vendor whose primary business is network, and they only sell, besides colo, only sell services like transit or transport, or the majority of their revenues are derived from network services, even though they say they're carrier neutral, we all know that they have a vested interest in trying to sell you their network, or they're putting their network first, or they're going to make it more easier for you to consume the network, which is okay too. But at the same time, a truly carrier neutral data center who is not selling network services as more than 40% of their revenue base, they have a vested interest to bring in as many carriers as possible. They're rolling out the red carpet for all the carriers. They want to build a network ecosystem for their customers. Data centers ran by network vendors are not doing that. And so I look at it from a sales perspective and sort of what their products and services are. The next point here is a lot of people want to talk about how many networks are in the facility. How many networks can I consume? Is level 3, NTT, Cogent, Verizon, who's in there? The more important question is how many different dark fiber carriers are built in. You could have 20 networks within a facility, but if they're all riding the same one dark fiber carrier, meaning there's only one underlying provider of the physical cable coming into the facility, there's a really big single point of failure there. Or maybe there's only 2 dark fiber providers. So you want to ask not only who are the networks, but who are the dark carriers, and then when you start talking to networks, which carriers are they using? You want to ensure that you don't want to have a false sense of security. I have 2 carriers, I'm diverse, meanwhile they're all coming into the same physical cable. It sounds crazy, but it happens a lot more than people realize, especially on the retail and enterprise side where those questions are not being asked.
So Sagi, the number of networks within a facility is obviously a key metric, but equally important, or maybe even more important, would be the fiber diversity.
Oh yeah, totally. That's actually probably certainly more important, I would say. And so no one is you won't see that in any marketing material for colocation facilities talking about the dark carriers. You really got to dig, and then you can go a lot deeper with this. So ensuring that they're built in via dual entrance, ensuring that the networks that you're consuming are not all coming back from the same other facility around the corner. Also, if it's important, understand what cloud on-ramps are available within the 4 walls of the data center, what peering exchanges are within the 4 walls of a data center, and also what interconnection fabrics are available. When I say interconnection fabrics, I'm talking about platforms like Packet Fabric, Megaport, or ECX. And those bring a lot of capability, and they can really help you if there's only 5 networks in the facility, but there's a fabric. Well, now you have access to maybe 100 networks within the metro. The other cool thing about an interconnection fabric is that you, as a retail enterprise end user, you can really take back control of your sort of network destiny. If I have 10 physical if I have colocation with 10 physical cross connects to 10 carriers, and I want to move my colo across the street to another provider, another colocation provider, I got to call all of my networks. I have to have them retool my cross connects, move everything over. I got to do middle of the night migrations and hot cuts and moves. If I'm using an interconnection fabric, that's potentially one cross connect where I can consume all those networks, and it's one cable to move. So you might not want to have all your connections coming over there, but if you can reduce the amount of sort of hot cuts and retooling by 70%, that's huge capability. Also think of fabrics as great out-of-band platforms, so you don't have to buy DIA or DSL or LTE modems. And the last thing is, a lot of co-location vendors are coming out with their own fabrics, and I would argue that this is really like a neutrality issue. I would never advocate to use the fabric of my colo vendor, because the idea of using a third-party fabric allows me to leave that co-location vendor and move somewhere else. I want my co-location vendors to be completely segmented from my network vendors. So when I go to see that the colo vendor has their own fabric, I kind of shy away from it. I'd rather work with a network company whose core business is that. Next point is location. Does the location matter for where your colo is sitting? And you might sort of say, yeah, I have it under wraps, or I don't care, it doesn't matter. But think about the future, and think about sovereignty laws with GDPR and data sovereignty. At some point, and if you're sort of in like a compliance-minded business, keeping data even within the same state might be meaningful. So keep track of that. And if you are in an industrial sort of line of business, or IoT is something that's coming up, you might want to have your deployment sort of edge and low latency and regional. The next point is remote hands. Everyone asks, do you offer remote hands? What's the turnaround time on remote hands? How much does it cost? But we would argue that you need to go much deeper. So let's call it remote assistance, because remote hands can really spill into the need for remote much more, depending on the severity of the issue. So first ask them, what will you do and what won't you do for remote hands? If obviously most people will walk over to a cabinet, hit some buttons, reboot the server, console it. But if they console it and they've determined that you have bad memory or a CPU is unseated, will they open up the server? Will they take it down and bring it back to the lab and run it through hard disk testers? Do they have those testers available? Same thing with stock. Do they actually have stock available? So if you realize there's a bad component, that they can swap it out for you. Yeah, you should have vendor support, and yeah, you should have redundancy. But when you're in a bind, if your colo vendor has the capability to go deeper, troubleshoot your hardware, provide you with temporary gear or parts, that could be the difference from hours or days worth of downtime.
That's a great point to make, because you don't want to just rely on the fact that it just says remote hands available and check that box and that's it. I mean, you don't want to have to find out when you really need it that to what extent it goes to, and how much they can really help you or not.
Yeah, for sure. And also ask, who are the people doing the remote hands? Is it the security guard who's seated at the data center 24/7 so that they can check colos in to bring them to their cabinets, who are also doing remote hands? I would not want that person touching my cabinet. I'm sorry, I've had that happen to me. And after 5 minutes of the person being in the front of the cabinet, I said, thank you very much. Please close the cabinet. I'm going to take the 2-hour drive in myself right now at 2 in the morning and deal with it myself, because I don't have the confidence. So if you're dealing with a vendor who actually offers other services such as cloud services and storage, which we'll talk about in a minute, it could be that the people that are doing remote hands are the same folks that are managing compute platforms like VMware. They're familiar with Dell and HPE and Cisco and Juniper, and they can recognize the error messages on the screen. That's what I would consider clueful remote hands. You're actually getting a ton of value out of the folks who are right there in front of you, sometimes more than your own people. So really understand what's available for remote assistance. How deep do you go? Can I borrow KVM access? Can I use a shared KVM in a bind? I mean, I know Webair, we do that. We do all of these things because it's all about building a partnership and helping out our customers when they need help.
So clueful remote hands really becomes an asset to your company.
Yeah, and again, you might be thinking, we don't need that. We're just doing POP deployments, but don't think about it day one. Just think about it as a security blanket that if and ever when, either they have it or they don't. So now let's talk about the Retail Plus, or the hybrid IT enablers, or the co-location facilities with ecosystem. The reason that this is important to talk about is because the world is not really looking at infrastructure anymore from, hey, my servers are either in a colo or on premises, or they're in a public cloud. Everyone is moving to a hybrid architecture where the most common deployments of mid-market and large enterprise is going to be a mix of owned co-location, local or regional private cloud or hosted private cloud services, and some public cloud. And because of that, the co-location providers can really play a big role and be instrumental into being these hybrid IT enablers. And the reason that enterprises are moving towards these hybrid models is because the market's maturing. Everyone is sort of understanding that public cloud has its place, and has workloads where it's not a great fit for. So today, people are really looking at their workloads and looking at each workload's individual requirements around latency, sovereignty, security. How perpetual are they? Are they workloads that are pretty stagnant in nature, but maybe highly need to be highly available, or are they bursting in nature? And on a per workload basis, understanding what is the best platform. And more important than saying I'm going all in on this cloud or going all in on that cloud, or I'm only doing colo, more important than picking a single direction is building a reference architecture for your organization that allows you the freedom to utilize multiple clouds and to utilize all of the platforms together. That has to be forethought and architected. At Webair, this is kind of how we do it. A friend of mine recently kind of coined this as sort of like the metro edge. Edge compute at the base of the cell phone tower, we're not there yet. But certainly what we see is the metro edge is real today. We have healthcare organizations and hospitals and banks who are looking to get their infrastructure off-site. They don't want to manage it. They don't want to own it. They want to consume it as a service. But public cloud is just not a good fit for some of those workloads. What we've done is we've built this architecture where they can privately connect to one of our regional colocation facilities. They can co-locate their workloads and they can consume our cloud services internally. And at the same time, we will provide them with connectivity to the public clouds. And I'll talk about where colo fits in a second. But here's an example of how it works for a regional hospital. So really what they're doing is they're building the colocation facility into their local IT. They're making the hosted private cloud and the colo a participant within the network and security paradigms that they built for the organization. The cloud and the colo is not an exception. And us, in this case, as Webair IT, as a hybrid IT orchestrator, we're sitting in between all the platforms and orchestrating and managing.
So that scenario, Siggy, as you just shown here on the screen, really gives you the best of both worlds. Like you can have public cloud, private cloud, and mixture of your own equipment.
Yeah, that's exactly what you want. And oftentimes, people want to go to a all cloud model or a hybrid cloud model. They just don't know how to get there. They made investments in hardware. They are stuck on legacy or certain platforms. All they hear is cloud all day. They want to go to the cloud, but who wants to throw away $1 million of gear that they bought 3 years ago? So
it's a more phased approach.
Yeah. So this retail plus or co-location, which contains an ecosystem of managed services within the four walls of the data center, really gives you the capability to use colo where it makes sense and to start virtualizing and moving certain layers of your infrastructure to the cloud. So let me explain what that looks like. If you're working with a sort of retail plus co-location vendor like a Webair, you can move in day one for colo, bring all of your equipment, and then opportunistically, as your equipment goes end of life, as you need more capacity or as you lose the appetite to own specific layers, those can be virtualized to us and privately connected to your colo environment behind the firewall, within the same facility, privately connected. And so when you run out of space on your SAN storage, you don't have to buy another SAN. You can consume iSCSI SAN as a service. Maybe you only use it temporary until you're at that break-even point where it does make sense again to buy another SAN, and we backfill you. Or maybe you just want to get out of the headache of managing storage, but you're more than comfortable running your hypervisors. And so by working with a colocation vendor who offers these cloud services within the same facility, you can use colo as a stepping stone to cloud. You can move in with all your own gear, and within 2 years be completely virtualized, and it'll be done iteratively, step by step, and you can mix and match your own equipment to cloud services above, below, side by side your colo. But again, you have to ask about what services are available day one. If you move into a network-focused or an interconnection-focused facility, they're never going to have the appetite to offer these services, nor will the wholesalers or the niche players. So again, the message with this is cloud shouldn't be a message of let's throw away our hardware. If you work with a retail plus colo provider, the message is not throw away your hardware. It's never have to buy hardware again if you don't want to. Or focus on what you're good at and own that equipment and virtualize the rest. But the fact that it's side by side within the same facility, all of the contention points that maybe your CISO or your CIO put up on using third-party cloud, a lot of those will go away. And again, this comes down to, you might not need this today, but if it's potential for the future, better to work with a vendor that actually does it, just in case. And some examples of these services would be, let's say, a hosted private cloud, where us or a similar vendor will give you like a VMware vCenter cluster as a service on your own dedicated bare metal compute, paid for on a monthly basis, block storage, file storage, object storage, networking services, and so on. Other thing too is I'd also ask, who are the other vendors, and other customers within the facility? Are there managed security vendors? Are there voice over IP vendors, hosted VoIP? It's important to know the other customers too, just like from a network perspective and network carriers, what are the other types of service providers that you can consume? At Webair, when we look to build our ecosystem within our facility for our enterprise customers, it's not just our own native cloud services that we're talking about, or the third-party networks, or the ability to on-ramp the public cloud. It's the fact that we have 10 plus MSPs who have different focuses on managing applications, or MSSP security companies who can scan our customers with some cybersecurity from the inside out. And because we're hyper-focused on our core offerings, we tout our customers' core offerings to our customers instead of trying to compete with them. So I'd ask about sort of the other customers too. And lastly, sort of on sort of what to watch out for is security. And some of the gotchas here are, people are asking, we notice people are asking the wrong questions. I know because they're asking us those questions and we kind of correct them. People are asking, do you have a SOC 2 type audit? That's a good question.
Or they just say, do you sign a BAA? And that's it. That's the extent.
Yeah, what they should be saying is, what's covered by your SOC 2 audit? Is it just the physical footprint? Or what's covered by your BAA? Is it just your colo? Or is the BAA covering your network services? Is it covering the managed firewall or the managed backup services? Is your SOC 2 only covering the physical colo, or does it cover your NOC procedures and your management procedures and all that? Or are there, the question shouldn't be, do you have a SOC audit? It should be, do you have a SOC audit, and were there any exceptions noted in the audit? So I'd certainly try to be mindful of going deeper. And obviously the OpenIX certification can be helpful there too, because it asks a lot of the questions about ownership and accountability as well. And OpenIX also now includes HIPAA compliance too. So I'm not going to go through all this, but the point being is that if you ask me who's the best colocation provider, just like if you ask me who's the best cloud provider, there's never an answer. It's always pushback. It's always answered with a question. And the question is, what's your workload? What are you trying to accomplish? What does your infrastructure look like? And better than choosing one platform, it'd be best to work with vendors that have the workload's best interest at heart and who are helping you build that reference architecture for multi-platform, multi-cloud. So at this point, I want to kind of hand it over to Valerie and really talk about how OpenIX can help us with all of those questions. I mean, I threw a lot of information out there, and yes, as an end user, you can run through and ask all those questions, or you can ask for a SOC 2 audit. But there is another tool that you can ask, which is determining if the peering exchange or network fabric that you're working with or data center vendor is OpenIX certified, because then you can just look at their report and a lot of these types of questions are answered. So Valerie, I'll hand it off to you. Maybe you can start with just a summary of the value props on OpenIX.
Thanks, Siggy. Yeah, so OpenIX currently has 5 IXPs and 21 data centers that carry the OpenIX certification. And the reason that they do that is because of the value proposition that OpenIX can bring them. And it allows data center providers, IXPs, carriers, cloud service providers, and the end customer to all have an understanding that they are coming to a place where there are standards for minimum requirements to be met. And so those standards are actually built by our committees, and we have several of them. We have the IXP Standards Committee, the Data Center Standards Committee, the Marketing Committee, and the BCOP Committee, which is a Best Current Operating Practices. These folks, or these committees, are made of volunteers who are experts in their fields, and they've developed and maintained these standards, which then lead into a company deciding they would like to get certification. So from our website, there is an application that you fill out, you submit it, you go through a review with the committee, and as long as you're able to check the boxes, you would then receive certification and become listed within our database of certified entities.
Great.
So we have two current standards right now. We call them OIX1 and OIX2. OIX1 is the standard for internet exchanges, and it's important. An outage on your internet exchange level can actually be felt around the globe. And so this standard would help set the minimum requirements for levels of service and engineering to ensure that we have a robust operation taking place and to minimize any potential outages. And you can see on the screen there just the different pieces that we look for as part of the certification process. The other standard that we currently offer is called OIX2, which is specifically for data centers. And you will find here that it's different from other types of certifications that you usually find for data centers, but mainly due to the fact that it's been created by peers within the operator industry. Same thing for the IX standard. And all of this gets done through OIX membership. It's open to anyone with an interest in interconnection. So if you would like to have a voice and participate in the future of how the world connects, then you can join OpenIX as a member. Currently, it's $50 a year, but by the end of this year, that will have been moved to no cost. We're kind of doing some of the back-end work on that right now. But the member benefits, you can vote in our elections, participate in the annual meeting, you can volunteer to serve on a committee and run for the board of directors. Which brings us to the initiatives for 2019. Now, I have to admit that up front, I just joined OpenIX as its executive director over the summer, so I'm still getting all of the pieces settled out for me. But some of the things that we are working on that should be completed by the end of the year is migrating to that free individual membership model. We have already completed an overhaul of our website. The next task, which will probably get unfortunately pushed for OpenIX into the start of 2020, is to grow those certified entities. Participating with you guys today is helping us increase awareness. And then we're also working to develop an interconnection report, which will be made available to all of our members.
Valerie, thank you for the intro to OpenIX. Just a couple of questions for you. How would you say OpenIX differs from other standards we see in the industry, such as SOC audits or standard mandated by specific industries such as PCI or even HIPAA?
Mainly, the OIX standards have been developed by peers in the industry to set that baseline by which a facility should operate. As Sagi mentioned earlier, a lot of stuff over the years has been learned through error, if you will, where you thought you had the right thing and then realized, oh wait, no, you needed something different. And so our peers, our volunteers have come together and kind of outlined what it was that was being set as a standard.
Excellent. And what would you say the backgrounds of the volunteers are? Is it more academic, or do they come from the operator community?
I would say that the majority of them come from the operator community. And those volunteers, they really are the lifeblood of the organization, and they have various backgrounds. And some are academic, some are financial, some are actual operators. But the key really that holds them all together is that passion that they have for ensuring facilities and customers alike are able to enjoy a resilient and reliable internet.
So earlier in the webinar, Siggy spoke about using software-defined fabrics instead of traditional connectivity options. As service offerings become more virtual, do you feel like there is more of a need for these types of platforms to adhere to, like specific standards such as OpenIX, or would it be the opposite?
Personally, whether a service is considered to be traditional or virtual, the need for established standards and transparency is critical. The world truly is connected, and for our community to make the most of it, an establishment and adoption of those standards will keep things growing. Even virtual still touches down on the earth every once in a while, and so where it touches down, you want to know that you're getting those minimum levels of service. And as we turn and move some of these, it just so happens that right now OpenIX is working on a new EDGE certification. It's a relatively new technology that has come into play over the last couple of years. And so we've got the leaders in that field right now working out a new certification plan and process to assist with that, so that as it starts to hit the market more, customers will know that they're getting something that will truly meet their needs.
Oh, that's great. I mean, I can tell you, being a chief business officer here at Webair, I mean, all you're hearing about now, which you didn't even hear 2 years ago, is about the edge, right? So that's very interesting. Thank you. Siggy, I have a question for you as well, another question here. So obviously I know you're the CTO of Webair, and you also sit on the board of OpenIX. Can you give a brief overview of why Webair decided to certify and what the benefit there is to Webair's customers being an OpenIX member?
Yeah, I think like Valerie said, what's very unique about OpenIX is that it was sort of born from the operator community. It sort of encompasses the battle scars of many of the folks who are working at data center companies or service providers. They've seen the good, the bad, the ugly, and they've sort of documented, put it in a document, said these are the right ways to do things and these are the wrong ways to do things. So it's different from for-profit organizations who are sort of building their own standards and certifying companies against their internal for-profit business, and it's different from sort of top-down government regulation as well. So I think it has a unique spot within the industry. I also think one of the other fringe benefits of not only of OpenIX and certified entities is transparency. Certified bodies or data centers or peering exchanges that are OpenIX certified are taking a stance and saying we're willing to show our customers and our end users where we have deficiencies. We're willing to show them what the exposures and the risks are, as well as where the redundancies lie, and that's by virtue of sharing the OpenIX certification with the user. So Webair is a big proponent of transparency on the internet. You mentioned the interconnection fabrics before, and as things get more virtualized, the need for more certifications. I think that's very true. The more layers of virtualization and abstraction that get built within these platforms as a services or platforms on top of platforms, people will start to lose trust when they don't know actually what's running under the hood. And OpenIX will give them the assurances to understand that those platforms are being built properly and being operated properly. And if people don't have those worries now, then as those platforms mature and as inevitably we deal with downtime and issues and outages, they will be looking for an avenue to gain those assurances. And the OIX certification, I think, is one of the best ways to achieve that.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And thank you, Valerie, for joining us today and sharing some insight into OpenIX. And thank you, everyone, for joining our webinar. Please feel free to reach out to us directly. You can contact us at webair.com or 1-866-WEBAIR1 for any follow-up questions you may have. Thank you again.